Hello, my name is Jacquelyn McColl, and I work for Solsys, a Toronto-based consulting company with a long history of working with clients in telecom, banking, health, insurance, and other industries. In recent years, we've been working with a variety of clients, helping to tackle some of the most difficult challenges that companies have while addressing security in software. We've worked to help some of our clients and watched many others move towards Agile DevOps product development teams for software development. These teams tend to own a day-to-day security implementation as part of their development work. This is due to teams making frequent and rapid changes in code and making more frequent deployments of their products. Security as a department or function can't always keep up with these teams and is having to find new ways to work with them. In an organization where this kind of transformation is happening towards Agile and DevOps teams, what does this really mean for security departments and those responsible for security as a practice? What will the security architects and practitioners have to think about or change from their traditional roles? In order to discuss some of our experiences and to more fully answer this question, Solsys is pleased to host a panel discussion on this very topic. Here, we've brought together some of our very own employees and partners in the community, all individual thought leaders who work in this space to share their insights and experience. I'm pleased to introduce, in no particular order, the members of our panel today. Martin Aziz is the co-founder and principal consultant of Squirrel North, which is a Toronto-based consulting and training organization. Heavily specializing in the use of Kanban, Agile, and fit-for-purpose approaches, Martin and his team help organizations, including some Solsys clients, with focusing on improving knowledge work. Doug Brown is the managing consultant here at Solsys. He has a tenure at large organizations in software such as Oracle and Sun Microsystems, leading professional services teams across North America. Doug has experience working with customers, canvassing requirements, and identifying critical solution architecture components. Shawn is from Leanintuit and is an agile engineering coach who helps teams and organizations get to grips with improving technical and architectural practices. Leanintuit is a collective of authors, speakers, and coaches whose work has helped their clients from all over the world. Shawn has also previously been a speaker and presenter at many Agile conferences. Deryck Greer is the Chief Information and Security Officer of Protexxa Inc., a company who helps their customers with security training, education, and security intelligence, and Protexxa is a strategic partner of Solsys. Deryck is a former intelligence officer at the New Scotland Yard in the UK with a long history of working on everything security related, from physical to cybersecurity operations. Tobin is a consultant with Solsys who has worked with many clients as a product owner, helping them to take advantage of Agile DevOps product teams to deliver software products that meet customer needs and deliver business value, while helping those teams prioritize and maintain quality and security. He is also an active member in the Agile community as a volunteer organizer with the Agile Toronto Meetup. And keeping this panel of experts on track and in line, I'd like to introduce and hand things over to our panel moderator today, Jeff. Jeff Kosciejew is an Agile consultant, trainer, and coach. He's worked in a range of public and private organizations of all sizes in helping people deliver value in a humane way. He's actively involved in promoting and supporting the Agile community, where he enjoys making work fun and reflecting his serious, playful nature with his company, Agile Magic. Jeff, over to you.
Hey everyone! Thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to having a chat. I think maybe before we get too far into this, now that we know who each other is, maybe we should just take a moment to align on a couple of terms. And since we're talking about security and DevOps and Agile, maybe we should start with some of those words here. Shawn, maybe I can start with you, my friend, and you could maybe help give us an understanding of what we mean when we say DevOps. What are we actually talking about?
Okay, well, so DevOps is a reaction to some terrible things that happened in software development in the 1990s and the 2000s, 2010s, where we became specialized in what we do, and we invented this thing where developers would busily develop things and then pass it over to a second group called operations. So that operation groups would be responsible for running the software in production. Turned out that was a terrible idea, because when you separated those two groups, you introduced lots of handoffs and lots of wait states. and also the quality tended to suffer because the people who were operating it and making bug fixes were not the same people who developed it. So some smart people came up with this thing they called DevOps, which is a developer and operations are owned by the same people. So they appear in the same team. So a team is responsible for building software, promoting it to production, and operating it. So, of course, in the last 10 or 15 years, that's turned into something called a DevOps team, which is just the old team with a new name. So you pass it over to your DevOps team, and they operate it in production, and the same problems happen. There's my cynical take on DevOps.
Awesome. Actually, it's funny, Shawn, that you mentioned that, because that was going to be one of the questions by Martin I was going to ask you when you talk about org design and helping team structure. This DevOps team that Shawn talks about is sort of this new construct. And I think one of the things that we've seen in multiple organizations now is that we still have a dev team who hands it off to a testing team, who then hands it off to a DevOps team who does the deployment, and then the operations team continues to operate it in production. And it sounds like what Shawn is saying is that maybe that's not really what the intent of this was going to be. What have you seen in how teams are structured?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's a universal answer to that, in that, if we think about progress over the last couple of decades, not all organizations have been moving at the same rate. So, you think about Shawn's kind of idealized description of DevOps, and that exists. But a lot of organizations never quite got there, and they are still very much structured through functional groupings, right? So if we think about the structures, there's accounting, there's HR, there's this, there's that, and that same thinking goes into technology. So there's security, there's PMOs, there's all these other groups. So you've got the intersection of a lot of inertia from quite a lot of decades of working a certain way, and a new concept comes in, and a lot of the natural tendencies is to think about how can we take that new concept and make it compatible with how we're working today. And sometimes that attempt kind of moves away from the actual intent of what the new tool is supposed to help you with. So you end up with these kind of weird mishmashes, right? But it's not just DevOps, it's everything that has the same risk of not really meeting its potential.
John, while we're talking about teams, and it's a little bit of a segue from DevOps teams a little bit, but we've also heard of the idea of product teams being introduced. What do we mean, or what have you seen when people are talking about product teams?
Yeah, I think it's really just the idea of having a software development team or a team working together to support a single and sometimes multiple, but a single product. And that's really sort of a piece of software or a platform or a service that supports a specific customer and produces a specific set of value for the business. And sometimes those product teams are internal. They're servicing more internal clients. Sometimes they're delivering products that customers are using directly. We can also have an organization where there are multiple development teams all working to support the same product. But it can tend to get quite complicated to do things like continuous integration and continuous delivery, and to support ideas like DevOps when you've got lots of groups kind of, checking code in and doing different things. So we're tending to see these product teams are, one or two perhaps DevOps style groups that are responsible for deciding as a team what to build and what features are going to service our customers best and deliver value. Product thinking is a lot about making sure that we treat what we're doing as a product or service, and we kind of know where our boundaries are of what we can influence and change about the product or system, and truly being responsible. So I think, DevOps teams, a lot of it's about thinking about sort of, if I was responsible for this software and this system, what kinds of things would I need in place? And I think product teams, that's sort of the same perspective, but perhaps from a different angle. So we tend to see that I think there are, lots of teams that are kind of moving in this direction, where it's like, I'm responsible for this product and I need to think about its development and its operations. And it sort of all folds together that way, I think.
I think we're going to come back to that one in a little bit here. There's one other type of team that I wouldn't mind touching on, Deryck. I'm hoping you can perhaps weigh in a little bit on the security team. Obviously, incredibly important, especially in today's age of threats in digital environments. How are security teams structured? Are they currently in many organizations, are they focused in, are they like a product that other teams internally, as John mentioned, would then consume? What are you seeing from a security team?
I think there's a romanticized answer that, there's a clear delineation of security teams that are responsible for either your governance, risk and compliance, your incident management, your vulnerability and patch management, maybe your threat management, your SIM or your SOC or your CSIRT. But what I've found in the experience is there's a gap thinking about your DevOps and secure DevOps in when something is developed and when security is applied. And often when you apply the business side of it and you apply that business thinking, security is not the primary driver of a product, unless it's a security product. So that product has goals to get to market, get to customers as quickly as possible. The people working in those DevOps team or those dev teams or ops teams are often doing multiple products at the same time that they're trying to release, and security is the add-on feature. I think security products now are trying to think about a service that they're offering or a product that they're offering end to end, and then saying to those other products that are being developed, that software, here's the requirements we need from you for us to be able to apply our product effectively. And that's where I see in this space there's a gap, because those that are developing the products are driven by different things than those that need to secure the products.
So Shawn started us off talking a little bit here about DevOps, which we extended then to include product teams or business teams in that traditional. We've now introduced the idea of security here. Doug, I'd love to come to you and get your take on bringing all of these together in what some might call a DevSecOps team, bringing everything together. I'm wondering, how many more things I can shove into this team right now.
DevSecOps is test.
Yeah, like
Well,
everything now
yeah.
is showing up in there. But Doug, I'm just wondering, if this idea of enabling all of these things within in a single team seems like a real challenge to have all of those skills, to have all of that expertise in there. I'm just wondering what you've seen and where that maybe has worked.
To be successful with our customers, we're not only delivering technology, we're having to get into how can you most effectively do that. That's not an easy answer, depending on who you're talking to or what their leadership view is on that. But we need to have a position because as we move forward, and some of our services include, cybersecurity and API gateways and observability. We need to frame these in terms of business value to the organization and customer. And ultimately, the technology isn't effective. It's more around solving a business problem.
Yeah, I think it goes to what Deryck was saying. There's the focus is very much, on a development team to solve the business problem and deliver a product, right? But there's a lot expected from those teams now, from operations, for security, for all of these other things that we've talked about. And, a single team or even 2 or 3 small teams working to develop a product can't do it all. So I think, as Deryck was saying, having other products in the organization that are offered to these teams to help them with some of those jobs is really critical. As much as the teams need to be fluent and understand the priorities of security and everything else that they're developing, they need help, and they need platforms that are going to enable them to worry about those things and prioritize them easily.
So it seems to me that when we talk about this DevSecOps idea, and the idea of teams starting to think about security as well as solving their business needs or their business problems that they've been tasked with, it sounds to me, Shawn, a little bit like what happened, I'm going to say 10 or 15 years ago, when development and testing were 2 separate teams. And over the last decade or so, we've started to see those 2 groups come together, where developers and testers are now collaboratively working, so that when something is done, it works and is done in a robust way. It sounds to me like we're starting to see that trend now extend out to involve things like security. Is that what you're starting to see and think about and talk about?
Typically, that security team is an external team. They see themselves as the gatekeepers. Their job is to stop us from delivering any bugs or any security issues into production, which might mean they're going to slow your delivery down to a crawl. But I have seen it work. I was at a company a couple of years ago, and we were doing a migration to Azure, and we luckily had gotten a security guy who wanted to become a developer onto our team. So one of the guys from the security team joined our team. So he educated us about security. He knew all the best practices, and he knew who to talk to. Right. So the security team was operating kind of a traditional way, but he was their friend. Right. So he helped us. So I would say we were a DevSecOps team at that point.
That's very cool.
And we would not have delivered without him on that team.
Jeff,
Very
could I
cool.
add to that a little bit? So I mean, Shawn, I mean, when I'm reacting to what you're saying with the embedded security person team, like it's, beyond that, it's an example of a way that security was serving that team, right? And I think I want to latch onto that word serve because, structurally, you look at security groups and they can adopt a functional approach or a service-based approach, right? So one is to perform a function, keep us safe, and we're going to do these things and we're going to do those things and so on. Very traditional. Now, if we take on a service lens, then we'll say, okay, well, we're serving, and who are we serving? And we start to think of there's two very obvious groups. There is the ownership structure executive, keep them off the evening news in terms of some form of massive breach, keep the organization safe within whatever risk tolerance they were trying to hit. But then there is these teams and the employees trying to bring products to market in a quick, efficient way, and they need things out of their way. And so how do we serve them? Right now, embedding a security specialist might work in one area and may not work in another. So finding the right things, whether it's offering the right tools, offering the right training, offering the embedded people, is an expression of serving those groups, right? And I think until that gets adopted within an organization's security group, you're going to be missing the opportunities. And I think that's a key thing to hold on to.
I love that framing, Martin. We see this in DBA teams, architecture teams, security teams, DevOps teams that we're talking about. They have that functional, not that service model.
Yeah, I think it's worth reiterating that, if these modern sort of DevOps teams, these product-focused teams, they're agile teams and they're iterating quickly. They're, maybe it's weekly sprints, maybe it's a sort of a flow, whatever, but there's a lot of code changes. There's a lot of small experiments, a lot of frequent deployments, in that effort to have business agility and serve customers quickly. And in that environment, having kind of a functional relationship with someone who steps in at some kind of gate period or, steps in and starts laying the law down or just says, no, you can't deploy yet. It really just doesn't work. It breaks down that idea of business agility and delivering quickly. So
we've all seen teams work around them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And security gets, in that traditional model, security either gets ignored or devalued by the team because it's just another blocker that I have to skip around.
And it's not a good thing, right? Because security is necessary, right? So that's
if I can add a few things to that. Listening to the input, agree with everything that's being said. I think what I see in practice is the realities of the day-to-day often stop these things from happening. So when you think about security teams, let's look at the security umbrella we're operating in. Generally, security teams would be IT security, you have your network security, and now you have your SOC. As we become more digitized and the demands on those security teams increase, with constantly more and more things being connected to the internet. Everybody wants to connect everything, right? All platform providers, all products now want to connect your clock, connect your chair, connect everything to the internet. Those security teams are having to deal with work overflow. They have a lot of demand. And yes, I'd love to say to my security team, sure, go ahead and join that DevOps team and give them the advice and the guidance that they need. But the moment an incident breaks or a 0-day comes out, or there's some threat hunting that needs to take place, that resource is pulled. And this is where I think two things are important when you're thinking about security and DevOps. Is security design, how are you designing your teams? And I like what Martin, you said about functions and service in your security design of your teams. And two is about capacity, knowing the boundaries of what it is that you're doing. So in terms of the function, yes, you have the things that you need to do. In terms of service, you have to serve your internal customers so you can deliver this external product. And the last thing I'll say is the education piece, the purpose and the why. Often you find from a security perspective, we're very introspective. We know very clearly why we're doing this and what we're trying to protect against. But being able to articulate that to your software engineers to say, this is the reason why I need you to develop these logs in this particular way. It's because it protects our organization or this product from this particular threat. Because there's no way you're going to take a software engineer and make them a security engineer overnight. The skill set is similar, but also very, very different. And just having enough of that thoughtful education piece in terms of to the why and the purpose, it embeds that connective tissue between the two teams as they understand why they're doing those two things.
Yeah, I think enablement's a great way to put it as well. Like education enablement becomes critical because we're then making sure that people are, we're teaching them to think about this stuff on a regular basis. And I think your example of, people getting pulled off to other emergencies is a good one. But network security is a great example of, to me, a service on which, product teams rely, right? When I deploy my product to the cloud or to one of our data centers or whatever it might be, I'm relying on that network being somewhat secure. I'm relying on that network being available, etc. And so that's a sort of a good, very basic example of the kind of service that security teams are going to offer that everybody relies on. The network is one of them, and the security of that network. But I think there's lots of other examples we can talk about with regards to the kinds of services that the security group can offer that makes teams inherently more secure or enables them to be more secure on a day-to-day basis.
Some of the organizations, we're talking about thousands of teams, not like hundreds, thousands, right? They cannot hire the depth of a security team to, embed as a solving strategy for that. So they have to come up with ways that are going to be sustainable and they'll scale. And a lot of that comes into things like training and tooling and things like that. We can't expect deep expertise across, thousands of teams. It's just not going to work. You're going to run out of competent people in that level of expertise, right? So ways to make it accessible and kind of like, the idealistic way that, we saw DevOps described back in the day, hit the button and it tells you whether the thing is broken and, we can't integrate, and auto regression, all that stuff. It kind of needs to go in that direction from a security perspective as well, if it's going to scale.
So I would say, Martin, what you said reminded me of something that I would tell security practitioners, especially very vocal security evangelists, people that were security purists, is that be in the business that you're in. You're not taking a business and trying to turn it into a security company. And often that's a sign of maybe either a poorly managed team or a poorly led team from a C-suite or an operations leader perspective, because they try to turn that organization into a security company. Well, we need to have this asset, we need to have these tools, and we need to have all these things in place. But really, you're a school or you're a university, and what the business you're in is providing education. And the most important thing is making sure you can have that online learning. It's not about all these security tools. And that was a great point, Martin, that just I wanted to drive that home.
Yeah, I think it is good to add that your security department can't do everything necessarily for your entire organization, right? And especially providing a person per team, etc. But I've also seen development teams where the understanding of the security requirements and the risk areas are actually with the development product team that's building that service. In some cases, like we think about things like API security, for example. A security department especially in a school or something like that, in some organizations anyway, aren't necessarily going to have a full understanding of all of the possible security attack vectors that are applicable to them, and where the risks of their specific software are going to be introduced as well. So, from that perspective, sometimes the security expertise is with the DevOps team already in some cases, and they have the experience developing software and building those products in that area. So again, I think that goes to the idea that the security team at that point can kind of support that expertise and enable and help prioritize, help answer questions about specific other areas where I have to integrate or where I have to introduce, some form of certificate signing or some technical aspect that I may not have had as much understanding about. And providing tools to those teams and services to those teams that they can use, I think is kind of critical. But I think now we're going down the path of what security departments need to do. So,
if I was to add to that, I would say that some of the threat modeling stuff ending up in the product team's requirements is a good thing, right? It's a matter of capacity and being able to scale that.
Yeah, actually, Martin, you mentioned automation testing, validation. Are we ready to push? We've built that kind of stuff for some of our clients in a certain area, and we've made sure security automation is part of that. Automated security testing is part of that, so that we're not introducing, invalid authorization and things like that. We're testing that all the time. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Sorry, Jeff.
Well, I mean, only to say that your example is unfortunately not a common example, right? So, like if you think about most organizations, at least that I go into, they've got, okay, so you probably all saw this, a huge pile of technical debt that they've ignored for years, right? Now, why is that? Well, it's something that Deryck talked about earlier about, the position of product, right? So product managers are highly focused on features, right? Features bring features to the marketplace, and rightly so. And so as those, we're not very good at predicting when things are going to be delivered. So we overpromise, we back ourselves in the corner, and we're crunch time. We got to get these features out. So we're going to cut corners. We're going to not necessarily invest in technical debt. Our level of test-driven development is going to take a dive, so it's not as automated. And guess what? Security is in the same bucket as all those other groups, right? So, I think that finding the time and investing in those tools is something that should be done, but it's just sitting in the hierarchy of waiting to get done amongst a whole bunch of other things that need to get done in most organizations, unfortunately. So, in your example, I would, without knowing the client you're referring to, I would suspect that their level of test automation, their level of technical debt is probably being addressed as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that fully empowered DevOps product teams where the entire team can make decisions about what is important to our clients and when are we going to deliver those things and how are we going to, do lean activities to deliver value quickly and see if that's what customers want, etc., tend to also be the ones where they are also enabled to prioritize things like technical debt pay down,
right,
automated testing, and think about security. And again, I think going back to that idea of education and empowerment and helping those empowered teams prioritize is really important.
So you're kind of revealing a bit of a precondition, right? So, if you don't have that, you're not going to get the other thing.
Right.
Well, may I add something that maybe we're being sensitive in terms of not talking about, which is the business side of it. Often within these organizations and these teams, the drivers of these decisions sit higher up. It's what are we rewarding? Like you said, we're rewarding features. We provide bonuses and incentives to get these things done. And when we think about the business, before we even talk about security or software development, it's what type of business are you? And how many people want to give up that responsibility? And I've seen on many occasions, both in the public and the private sector, where it might be in the interest of the product or the service for someone to remove a barrier, but the fear of that manager to not have that rigid control of it stops that from happening. So organizational design and organizational incentives, how you build those in, is also important before you even start talking about the DevOps and security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about educating developers, but you also need to educate your product people, because so often we lump these things, these non-functional requirements. You hear, well, those are NFRs, and that's IT's job. But if you talk to the product person, they don't want to break in. They don't want somebody to steal their credit card information. They don't want somebody to make payments against somebody's bank account. So it's in their best interest, but often we as security or IT people hide that from them, and we just take care of it in the background, and that's hidden work that they're not aware of. But that needs to be prioritized against the delivery of those features, right? So they need to be able to say, we need to be able to say, we as a group, we could deliver this feature, but we have this risk, and here's the quantification of this risk. Which one should we do now? And establishing that partnership, it's fiendishly hard, but it's necessary for security to be done kind of systemically.
Shawn,
Yeah.
you touched on something interesting there, and I'd like to open it up and just see if anyone wants to weigh in on this. But one of the things you just mentioned is that idea of risk and threat analysis. That I think when I've seen agile teams or teams engaging in the work, is there's so much focus on feature that and you know that this agile thing is being sold with the promise of you're going to be able to go fast, that we don't seem to do a lot of risk management. We don't seem to actually articulate the risks. We don't seem to explain the consequences of these decisions that are being made. And I'm just wondering if any of you have experience in that you can talk to a little bit about how you've thought about those or overcome some of those to make sure that we are thinking about them on our teams.
Risk is one of those things that is very easy to explain, much harder to actually do properly. Everybody understands risk equals likelihood times impact. Everybody in their day-to-day life does their own risk naturally. When you're walking to your car, what do you turn left or right? What are the things that you do? I think in terms of in practice, when we think about risk is broken down to the specific compartmentalized siloed department. They look at the risk from the risk of this feature not being released. Security looks at the risk from the risk of a breach. Maybe the product owner looks at the risk of sales and revenue. So the question that I come back to earlier is, by your organization design, what is your risk model? What is your risk matrix? Do people understand that? And do people understand how they fit into the loop? A really mature risk practice is one where I can give you our policies and procedures around risk. You can apply it to what we're doing in the organization, and you should be able to come up with a relatively repeatable score, outside of a mean deviation of X or N percent. And if that's not happening, if you're finding some people are coming down on a 1 or a 5, or they're weighting things differently, that means your risk practice is not mature at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I would add to that, in that, a lot of organizations do not know how they make decisions, right? It sounds like a weird statement to make, but you get into a bunch of people in the room and they look a bunch of information, they make a decision, and the next time they make a decision, it's in a different way completely, right? So a lot of the places that I consult with, we're trying to encourage them to develop explicit decision-making frameworks, right? Like, how are you going to make a decision? What should you consider, and what are these multiple dimensions? Time to market, ROI are classic things, but size, this market segments you're hitting, and guess what? Security and other things are part of that. And so if you can build that kind of maturity, that starts to become a better way of making decisions, and it leads to some consistency. Like I find it very, I always find it very bizarre how other industries have figured this out and software is still trying to figure it out. Like, so imagine you went to a hospital and, they decided that they weren't going to be cleaning the floors anymore because all the time need to be going to surgeons and nurses, right? They would never let that happen. They would always have a certain capacity allocation towards, we're going to divert this amount of energy to this type of work. And, somehow we're able to, stop cleaning the floors in software, a metaphor for whatever we want to talk about, whether it's security or something else, right? And it's very bizarre because it comes back to hurt us, kind of in a way that a dirty hospital would probably be very unsafe for patients.
Yeah, I think everything's a trade-off, right? And an empowered team can make those decisions about those trade-offs when they've got some kind of model to measure those decisions, whether it's something simple like weighted factor scoring models that help us decide what we're prioritizing next. And, but I think making cleaning the floors, like making security and testing and so on, like an ongoing part of behavior is really important in those in those development teams and those product teams. So that's what I've done with my teams before is we've included things like testing and validation and security as part of the definition of work being done and able to be shipped, etc. And in terms of trying to measure risk and understand where the software is that we're developing, we've relied on some tools and services from either partners or the security team. And it can be as simple as code scanning tools that look for libraries that have known defects in. And, are we using those libraries? Yes, we are. Are we using that function in that library? Yeah, we really should look at this. Or no, we're not. We could later, so we should think about an upgrade soon. But being able to have measurement metrics and information to have those discussions as a team so that we can decide when it's important to prioritize has been really useful.
I would add to that, Shawn. It's also when you think about organization structures, how do you put in place processes to get around gatekeepers? Whether those gatekeepers are intentional or they materialize, in your teams. I'll give you an example. And one of the things I really adopted, John, when we met and started talking was around OKRs. I really, really love OKRs because it should give you a very clearly defined objective, and these are what the key results are. So when you're going into these conversations, anybody should be able to articulate, I'm prioritizing this because it demonstrates towards this key result, which helps us meet this objective. And then when you get into a scenario where someone's feelings come into it, either a manager or a gatekeeper that says they don't want to do that, you need to have a process where you can challenge those things and say, well, hang on, does this meet our key result? Does the KPI feed into this, or does it meet our objective? And being able to unpick those things in a big organization, I haven't figured it out yet because gatekeepers still keep popping up, but I think that's where whoever can invent that secret sauce to get around those blockers, I think that's where you really find a mature organization in practice.
John, I wouldn't mind building on that and coming to you because you at Solsys have had some success in delivering a phenomenal product into the marketplace where you actually were able to incorporate much of what we've been talking about right on your team. That focus on great code quality, that focus on great security. I'm just curious if maybe you could tell us a little bit about what led to that and how you were able to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done work with clients where we've been deploying like highly secure API gateways to protect, transactions that are carrying health data, customer data, etc. And so, we made, the start of it for us was DevSecOps teams or DevOps teams that were empowered to make prioritization decisions and to prioritize quality, and quality in that environment also means security, not just, availability and reliability. But I think, we made thinking about testing and made thinking about security part of our everyday, our sprint reviews and our definitions of done. We kind of showed functionality based on tests as much as sort of showing the software working. So sort of demonstrating the fact that you have tests that check a security policy or something like that was really important. But it really was important to sort of empower the team to think about it. So we would do little things like celebrate the number of tests we'd added in a sprint around a new feature or something like that. And it kind of constantly reminds, the development team that that's important to us. But, the teams couldn't do everything on their own. We definitely needed those tools like code scanning tools. As much as we wanted to, as a DevOps team, we want to be able to operate the product, which means observability and good insights into what's happening on the platform or the system all the time. Monitoring all of that activity for potential security, compromises, like where, suddenly somebody's accessing an API way more than they did before or something like that. That wasn't something that the team could sort of just always build all the capability for all the time, right? So having, a security, an SCI they could send their data through, is important as well. Like enabling them through tooling, through education. We also would reach out to security experts when we were doing things like SSL and certificate security. It's hard to be up to date with all the latest, SSL algorithms and all that kind of stuff. So being able to reach out to someone who is up to date with that stuff and ask questions and find out if there's other platforms in the organization that we can use to achieve what we're trying to do, other systems we can integrate to. That's the kind of service that we sometimes got from security people in the organization, and that made us eager to sort of ask those questions, because we were getting enablement answers like, no, we don't have this, you do have to build it, so but here's the things to think about when you do, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, John, I might add to that that team was successful standing on the shoulders of teams who were providing good services, things like digital identity that are common across cloud services, things like observability, that tools that the developers on those teams could take advantage, opposed to having to build from scratch by themselves or carry that cost along in terms of delivering their products. I think that was a key as well.
Exactly. So having those products and services available to us that we could use was really important. But making part of using those every day and all the time, we made it part of the way we built. And day one when we started building this product, we didn't necessarily integrate all those capabilities and those activities, but we grew that as the product grew and as the team got more of an understanding about the marketplace they were serving and that kind of thing.
I want to go two ways from this one. Martin, I'm going to come to you in a moment. I'd love to hear your talk about John and Doug talking about the interaction between these teams. And Deryck, I'd love to get you to weigh in on that. But before I go to you two and talk about the interactions between some of these teams and how you set that up or how you enable that, Shawn, I'd love to come to you and get your take on how this impacts teams that are actually doing the work and starting to think about incorporating things like observability and security and quality, embedding them right into the product. And how do we avoid feeling threatened as developers on our team that we're being told that what we've been done or the way we're thinking about it, focusing on pushing out those features and pushing out those products, isn't thinking enough. We need to think more about things like quality, observability, and security, of course. All of these things John talks about, SSL updates coming through. Like, how do we incorporate that in our day-to-day work?
That keeps me in a job. Actually, it's a really good point, because I spend a lot of my time dealing with this issue. There's a bunch of things when we're talking about the individuals on the team. There's a bunch of reasons why they might not be open to these things. You have a developer who's been working for a long time in a certain way. They consider themselves experts, and when you present to them, well, okay, maybe you need to learn about security, that may be a threat to their understanding of their expertise. So suddenly they're a beginner again. So that can be tough. Often you find that developers who work in a traditional way of delivering software, they're measuring their progress by like how many lines of code they're producing. So on a daily basis, I've done 20 functions and 10 classes. I produced this functionality, right? And so now you're saying, okay, well, you're going to have to slow down a bit. So you're going to have to actually spend some time learning about security. You're going to have to build in observability. You're going to have to not just deliver these features that you're being lauded for, but you're actually going to have to be concerned about security. And so from their perspective, that feels like they're slowing down. It feels like you're introducing something that makes them feel like they're not as productive. So at the end of the day, they just don't feel like they've achieved as much. So the secret is just, for me, coming in as somebody who's trying to help teams, it's just empathy with where people are, right? So you'll find that helping them to see the bigger picture, helping them to see why security is actually in their benefit and the benefit of their customers, and then dealing with those organizational things that are reinforcing that. So when you have the product owner who's saying, no, you need to deliver more features, that's going to work against them adopting any of these new ways of looking at it. So so it's very much a contextual. It depends upon the person and the system that they're in. So, which doesn't mean it's not possible. You can introduce it, and gradually people will start to understand this, right? I would say it's a cultural change. You need to, starting at the execs, as I think Martin was saying, right from the top down, you need to help people to understand why security needs to be built in, not something that happens as an inspection at the end of the process.
I liked Martin's example of the hospital as well. You know, I can't imagine going into the hospital and saying, I'm the paying customer, you know, hurry up and take out my appendix. I don't have time for you to sterilize the equipment. Like, our doctors just wouldn't do that. And yet we do that in software development every single day. So I'm wondering, Martin, maybe if I can come to you, is how do we start to change that thinking, and how do we focus on embedding quality and security into everything that we do?
Well, I mean, I think, we harped on all sorts of organizations as functionally thinking, and I think we have to be, equally accepting of that same critique within development teams, right? So, going back to something Shawn said earlier about, day to day, they're thinking about executing on code and the tasks at hand. A big part of my job is reframing that with leadership. And one of the things I teach is the various tickets that are on the boards that they have on whatever digital system they're using, uh, in the language of their customers, for example, right? So these are not tasks to be done, but objectives to be reached in the language of the customers that they're serving. And once we can do that, we can change what the nature of the job is, right? The job is to serve this group of customers. They have a bunch of needs. Security is one of them. And so we can make decisions day to day collectively about meeting those needs rather than some sort of code utilization rate, right? Because I think the moment you're in that zone of trying to maximize that kind of utilization, they're just going to optimize for that, and there's no room for anything else. So that starts with leadership in terms of how they interact with various people on teams and just teams in general, and changing that language. The language that we use is the one that the customer uses, right? And everything else that we work on is subservient to that. So I think it really starts there.
I think some of that language and that leadership rather can come from security departments as well. Like, it has to be sort of prioritized and advocated or evangelized for, by those people, and help support like the IT department to make that a priority, and because of, by educating about risk, by educating about the kinds of security events that have been happening, and sharing stories from perhaps the industry where we've seen these problems, and like you say, like skipping out the sterilization of tools. No professional surgeon would ever do that, because the risk is much greater to the patient than it's worth it. So there's a level of sort of professionalism in software as well. I think that because I think the industry is very new and changing so fast all the time, that we are sort of perhaps missing out on. Like we allow, like, as professional developers, sometimes people do things that they really shouldn't be saying yes to or shouldn't be doing. But again, that comes, as you said, that comes back to the system that you're in, and the company that you're in, the leadership, and what's talked about as a priority, etc.
Deryck, one of the things that I observe, and I've even heard it as we've been talking today, is the language that we use when we're talking about security teams. We talk about the thems. There's the us and the thems. And I'm wondering how we change that language to be the we's. How are we focused on it? And we've heard talk about using the language of our customer. We've heard the idea of embedding this sort of importance and the value that it has to bring. But instead of us hearing about security as the gatekeeper, the stopper of us delivering value to our customers, is there a way we can change the interactions so that we're going from us and them to we, collectively focused on delivering great value to our customers in a responsible and sustainable way?
There are things that we can put in place to foster greater collaboration. And that for me is the mindset of the organization. I think Martin and Shawn and John alluded to it earlier, is having that clear vision of the why. What is the purpose? Why are we doing this? Why do we need to have this? And I believe, I'm not a software developer, but I believe that they understood the purpose, the ask from security of why this is needed in terms of that, the requirements, having that in place. It will get us closer to the we. But will there ever truly be a we and a them? I don't see it in my lifetime.
Well, so in practice, I have seen security groups and product development groups work very collaboratively. And yes, maybe they're not. Clearly, I guess at some point there's going to be a difference in perspective. But I have seen partnerships where the security people are helping the product people to deliver security, because it's really like when you talk about getting interrupted because there's another security breach. One of the ways that you solve that problem is you start building security in, and as long as you're having these security teams that are releasing insecure software, producing insecure products, you're going to continue to firefight, right? So it is in the security team's best interest to make those partnerships.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree, and again, I don't think there's anything said there that I disagree with.
Yeah.
I guess the on the ground that I would look at is, if I'm setting up a greenfield organization, great, we can build that from scratch. But most of the major security things that you can deal with is with established organizations and very big organizations. And then trying to make that change, as we already mentioned earlier, is not necessarily coming from the security or from the DevOps side. It's come from the organization culture side. Yeah. And you need to change that before you can get these other things put in place.
I'm wondering if we go back again, I'm going to go back a decade or so. I wonder, Deryck, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here with this. In fact, I'm not going to. I'm going to actually maybe see if Martin and Shawn want to weigh in on this one a little bit, and John maybe as well. But when we go back, I think we would have had a similar conversation around the operations team. We're too busy dealing with issues in operations. We're too busy dealing with system downtime. We don't have time. And Shawn, I love the idea of that firefighting versus fire prevention. We're too busy fighting fires that we don't have time to prevent the fires in the first place. And I wonder if
over here you're lighting fires. And over here you're trying to fight those fires.
We are, because of the way we've structured and rewarded people in the past. It's been push out that latest feature, and the heck with what happens in production, because that's operations problem, which is another reporting manager. And I'm just wondering how that has evolved over the years, and if we're starting to see some of that percolate into, as Deryck says, we're not going to get there tomorrow. It's not going to happen. It's not the way our organizations have been built today. But I wonder if we're having a conversation about it today. I wonder if we're starting to see some of that percolate through into organizations, that it's starting to become maybe we should focus on security prevention instead of security firefighting.
So I'll take the first stab at it. 10 years ago, I was in working for the Home Office in law enforcement, and I would say very much a view started to change towards this idea of community policing. How do you prevent things from happening as opposed to just dealing with the response? So applying that approach, you could see benefits in it. In terms of the technology and the cybersecurity side, prevention is definitely better than cure, but it's always those trade-offs and those way-offs between what are we spending on now, what's the priority now. But that takes me back to our earlier conversation about risk and prioritization. The number one thing I would say to security practitioner, I'm sure those that will be listening will say, if we had done that 6 months ago, if we had patched that, this would have happened. If you had remediated that, if you had fixed that code that we told you about, this would have happened. They would all be shaking their heads in agreement. But if you're able to have a good priority structure, then you're able to slowly inch away and chip away at these things in a credible way. The list will never end in insecurity, right? But at least you're able to start taking credible management decisions around.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that a bit. Like, I think we can be clever and strategic about the kinds of services security departments offer to teams to help with that idea of prioritization as well. And I'll take that code scanning example where we used a tool that was very good at gathering the CVE alerts on libraries and telling us about discovered vulnerabilities in libraries and alerting us, hey, this is in your repo, this is in your code base, it's used here, here, and here. If security departments in larger organizations are offering that as a tool, for example, to the different development and product teams, and it probably isn't one tool, it might be two or three different ones for different languages or different types of software being built. But if that was happening, not only are we making it clear, look, there's a tool and a service here that we've paid for that you can integrate into your pipeline that's going to help you with security. We can educate on that. But as people do that, we can also have some idea of, which pieces of software are using really vulnerable libraries. And when we get an incident, a big incident like something like the Log4j example that happened not so long ago, and massive thing. A lot of organizations were running around, like you say, like headless chickens, firefighting, trying to find out who was even using this library. If we're offering these tools, at least we can sort of look through them to say, well, these bits of software and these teams are using that library. Let me go and help them. Let me go prioritize working with them to close the gap. And I can worry less about these other ones because I know they're not even doing it. And if I see teams that have really bad metrics in terms of like you're using libraries with lots of known vulnerabilities, they're the ones I can maybe embed a security person into or offer more support to in terms of education, or talk to their, the organization, the part of the organization they're working in, and find out, why are you not prioritizing quality and security as part of that, right?
I used to really think that a lot of this needed to be driven from the top, and I still believe that. I didn't think it was happening, but I realized it was, right? I think, um, owners and executives in organizations, very large organizations, tend to be very entrepreneurial, and they understand risk very well, right? They don't get there by not understanding risk. They're actually very good at it. The challenge that group has is somehow those messages do not get spread across the organization. There's some sort of barrier or buffer that seems to be in the way. So there's a message there, and then you realize that these large organizations are very heterogeneous. There are places that are ready, and there are places that are not ready. And so recognizing that is also another kind of opportunity, because you realize, okay, so there can be a partnership with security in this particular part of the business because they're quite mature and they've got really good practices. And so let's go in and exploit that. And there are other places where it's just not going to work for a number of reasons. And they're still kind of developing some more basic skills. So, I think, for me, I'll say this kind of catchphrase, one service at a time, which is basically looking at things individually and saying, where are they? What's the opportunity? And large organizations have lots of opportunity for better collaboration with security, just not everywhere. And I don't think that just not being able to do it everywhere should be the barrier for doing it. There will be lots of opportunities.
And I think to add to that, Martin, so at the top, they have a good understanding of risk. I think we as development teams and we as security teams do a poor job of explaining what the risks are. So we insulate them from the problems that we're seeing, right? So we've got this old version of Log4j. We have systems that haven't had library updates. We can't support updates because we've let this technical debt accrue. We don't tell people, and we just let it fester.
Sure, Shawn, but I'm talking about, even if we were good, there could be 4 layers before that message is received, and by that time, the broken telephone has already taken place.
I think that the promise of DevSecOps is that, so when that Log4j problem happened, I was at a company that was kind of at the beginning of their journey, and it did shut them down. It was months worth of work to try and get to a point where they could upgrade the Log4j library. I've worked with companies where that would be a flag that would institute a PR that would be brought into the code automatically and put out to production the next day, right? So the promise of DevSecOps is that all of this can be made so much easier, but it does require that discipline and that attention to, as you say, Martin, to the many things that stand between the teams and being able to do it.
I was going to add to that, Shawn, and when you mentioned Martin, that teams transform at different speeds and different rates, right? Depending on what the nature of the product they're providing and the latitude they're given within an organization. I was speaking to a new term, somebody called the chief development officer at a corporation. He thought his job was to provide sponsorship for product teams, development teams, be an ambassador for the tools they need and support and help emphasize some of the things we were talking about. Tough road, he said, but good on them to assign somebody to have something so aspirational within an organization.
Yeah, when leaders see themselves as serving the organization and removing impediments between teams doing things better, and where they are now, you can get a lot of wins there for sure. That's a really good mindset. But as Martin said, often that's not kind of how things are seen, and you do have those layers between people who want to achieve that and the development teams themselves.
So we're getting close to wrapping it up here, but before we do, I've got a couple of things just on the top of mind, and the first one that I'd love to do and see if we can sneak both of these in is I'd love to get each of you to sort of give me an idea as moving forward, what products or services are needed but from security teams in order to start embedding this mindset, this approach. What tools do we have available to us that's going to make us successful in our organizations when, as Martin's already beautifully said, when we're ready to bring these things in, because not everyone's going to be ready, as he said beautifully. But what are the types of things, tools, techniques, services that are going to enable us to maybe take that next step forward?
Where do you want to start?
He's got the magic bullet.
I can start with one that kind of takes me back to what I originally said about how DevOps, the promise of DevOps has failed in large organizations because so we've built these DevOps teams that are now just operations teams, and I think what's the missing piece there is it's maybe the nature of the people who tend to go into DevOps and security. So I don't go into DevOps because I'm a people person, because I really want to spend time with people, training them in these tools and educating about the value of security, right? So the service I would like to see, the change I would like to see, is for these groups to somehow magically adopt that what Martin called that service perspective, right? So finding people who actually do want to help be an ambassador for security, to do that training, that reaching out, that partnership, right? And bringing those people into security and into DevOps. Because without that, there's going to be friction against us ever operating as a service. We're always going to fall back to that functional model.
Yeah, so I've spoken about the idea of education. I've spoken about the idea of tooling and running platforms, but I think that's critical to build on what Shawn said. Having a service mindset to all of those is huge, right? So if I can go and get the education I need when I get to a point where I have a question, or self-serve some courses, that's great. If I can go and fetch the tools when I'm in the position that I can use them and integrate them the way I want to my pipelines as a team, and find out what's available, that's great. And running platforms as a service, so like having an SEIM where a SIM where it's easy to use because the group running it treats it just like a product or service. If I was offering this product or service in the marketplace, how would I attract customers? I wouldn't do it by not telling them how they integrate with me and not helping them get integrated and showing them. I wouldn't sort of say, oh yeah, we do a bunch of stuff for you, but I'm not going to tell you about it, right? We need to make sure, in the team that I worked with, we had great observability. We were putting this stuff into a good observability platform that helped us, and the platform was being run as a service. But in terms of security monitoring on those logs, which we had tons of information that had lots of valuable security event type data in, the security team wasn't doing a great job of thinking of it like a service. And so they just kept saying, well, you have to send us all your stuff, but what does that mean? And how do I do that? And they wouldn't kind of come back to me and foster a sales process where we go back and forth and talk about how I can do that and why I should do that and why I should prioritize it. It had to be done, right? And so it never happened. And so, what a wasted opportunity where there was a lot of really good observability data that could trigger security events, because, it wasn't run as a service where I could put that stuff in easily, get it onboarded, and then see sort of possible security alerts and things like that, and see who was taking advantage of that information or take advantage of it myself as a team, right? So yeah, service mindset's critical around those tools, education, tooling, and platforms.
I think if I could have one tool that, to answer your question, would be the ability to automate threat modeling, where the user doesn't have to have the knowledge set to get the output. And I know with some of the technology that's been released this year, maybe we might be able to get to that in 2020, maybe later this year or 2024. But if I think about that role, it'd be automating the role of a security integrator effectively, where the person from DevOps, they could put in, this is what I'm using, this is the code that I'm using, these are the platforms, and it pushes out, here's the vulnerabilities you need to be aware of, right? Or here are the vulnerabilities you need to be aware of, mapped to the risk that the organization is prioritizing. And then they know what they need to do. And if we're not going to get there soon with the technology, then perhaps there's a role for a security integrator who is maybe 70% software engineer, 30% cybersecurity practitioner, or 70% security engineer, 30% software practitioner. So they don't have to be dominant in both. They're able to speak the language of both and communicate across the bridge. That would be what I'd want. Yeah, I could use that right now, actually.
It's a unicorn, though. It's hard to find.
It's right. It's unbelievably hard to find, and this is where if technology matures, which maybe it will in the next couple of years to do that, then that would be a big game changer.
Yeah, I think our biggest wins and our hope for a more evolved security profile for our customers is we're proudest about helping teams win and building great product teams, number one, and being able to continue to evolve the security element of that is, I think, where we see our best opportunity for wins. Teams are already organized for that. How do we take on more and are equipped to be able to scale and support that as well? And they provide a great winning example for other parts of the organization, which sort of reiterates on the number of things that my colleagues mentioned on the call.
So, I mean, I would kind of echo a bit of advice I was giving a security leadership team not too long ago. So this is a very large organization, thousands of employees are going through a bit of a digital transformation. You know what that means. And, parts of them have been doing all sorts of leading edge practices, other parts kind of this weird Frankenstein combination of old and new, and a whole bunch of places deeply entrenched in legacy processes, right? And they're like, well, how do we serve all these people, right? So they're thinking about servicing, and we said, well, you know what? You got to think about it as a marketplace, right? Different places will have different needs. They're different customer categories, and then you're going to have to figure out what to offer it. So, Deryck's killer app, probably very good for a certain portion of the organization, and another portion of the organization will probably use it to hang themselves. So depending on where people are at, you're going to have to think about your internal market and figure out how to serve them better.
100%.
This has been fantastic. John, Shawn, Doug, Deryck, Martin, want to thank you guys so much for the conversation tonight and for sharing some of these thoughts with us. Really, really appreciate it. Love the insights.
Thank you so much for listening and joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed and gleaned some insights from our expert panel. For more information about Solsys, you can visit our website at www.solsys.ca. Take care, everyone.